Hi everyone and welcome back. Today I'm going to discuss my August 2020 reads, and yes, in the same t-shirt I wear all the time. I'm pretty sure every single YouTube video for the most part I've been wearing this shirt. It's okay, it's it's what I wear when I'm at home and I don't have that much variety in my closet. So anyway, to get with it, I read 6 books this month and it was mostly enjoyable, mostly enjoyable. I mean, some not really super memorable, but I had 2 really good ones that I'm excited about. The first one I read this month was Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo, which is a Nigerian book about, it's sort of like the love story between the Yejide and Akin. So basically Yejide is unable to have children, and because of that her mother-in-law is forcing her husband to get a new wife, and so the story just basically follows their love story, and it's definitely different in the sense that it's not just, oh, he gets a new wife and she has to deal with a new wife and things like that. Like, actually the connection between Yejide and Akin is very, very strong, and it is very interesting to see basically their love for each other and the situation they've been put into. So it definitely strays from the trope of the other woman coming in, and I really liked the characters of Yejin and Akin. I was really fond of them, but at the end of the day, this book was just it was a so-so book. It was good. It was worth reading. It's a book I think I would still recommend. But for me, it didn't excite me to an extent that that I would feel like everyone has to read this. It was good. It was proper. It was good. It follows a different storyline than you would expect, and that definitely kept it more interesting. So that's this one. So after reading the Stay With Me, I was realizing that like I'd been reading a lot of literary fiction and nothing was really like super capturing my interest or keeping my interest. So instead of continuing, well, actually I did continue with another book, and then I was just struggling so hard, not because it was a difficult book or anything, but I was just struggling so hard to keep my focus. And so I decided to just put that book down and do some nonfiction. So kind of a book haul, because I went out and bought 4 books and I read 2 of them this month, but I went with some nonfiction, and I started with the book A Serial Killer's Daughter. So this is about the daughter of the BTK killer, which is a name he created for himself, which stands for Bind, Torture, and Kill. And so basically it's about this this woman and how she copes with learning the fact that her father is the BTA killer, a very renowned serial killer who killed 10 people. And it's her reflecting back on this very cherished life she had with him and this sort of very loving family they had. But it's her reflecting back and sort of putting the murderers, the timeline of the murderers, she's putting them with the timeline of her past to kind of see what was going on. And it's very, it's emotional. It's an emotional book. You really feel for her. You really feel bad for her because she really cared for her father. And by looking back, she realizes that he did have some very cold, very troubling moments, and there were times where he was a little difficult, and you definitely did have to sort of stay away with him and make sure you didn't push any buttons with him, because he could get very unstable. She doesn't discuss the murders at all, which I think is just, because as the daughter of this person, it devastated her to know that he did such horrific things. But you have to respect her decision that this is still a man that she loves, and it's still someone that, it's her father. He had a big role in her life, and so you have to respect the fact that she doesn't always want to taint that image of him. But basically, this book is basically her saying goodbye to him, basically her going through the grief of losing him, because she has lost her father. Basically, he's going to be in prison forever. She lost the father she loved. Her father has been replaced by this serial killer, basically. So I mean, the book is exactly what you would expect it. There are no twists and turns. There's no, I mean, obviously, as discovering you're the child of a serial killer, you're not gonna be like, oh yeah, that's exciting, this is interesting. Obviously, you're gonna go through pain and grief. She goes through quite a bit of PTSD, mental trauma. So the book is exactly what it is. So it's not like, don't expect like anything super exciting to happen. But I think it was definitely very interesting to get sort of this perspective, because often when these sort of high profile cases happen in the news and in the world, you're kind of like, well, how did the family not know? The family must have known. Is there anything they could have done to stop them? And it's like, that's really not the case. That's not really how these things happen. So it's good to have that perspective. So this was very interesting to read. Not a, I don't feel the need to read more books like this, and there are a few other books about women who have written about their fathers being serial killers. But I'm very satisfied with this one. I think it was a good perspective to read, and I'm glad to have read it. Now the next nonfiction I read was fantastic, but I mean that should have been obvious because it's one of the most famous nonfiction books out there, and that is Into the Air by Jon Krakauer. This was just, wow, this was amazing. This was really, really amazing. So Into the Air is about Jon Krakauer, who joins an expedition to climb to the summit of Everest. He has a very strong background in mountaineering and climbing and sort of those extreme sports, but he sort of had abandoned the thought of doing these high altitude climbs a long time ago when he had gotten so many injuries from his sporting, and he got married, and his wife wasn't super fond of the sport because it is dangerous. So he had given up on it, and he was just this journalist. And he was working for this magazine called Outside that asked him to do a report on sort of the overcrowding of Everest. And he agreed to that, but he was so tempted. He's like, well, I'm so close, maybe I can ask them to sort of extend the deadline and I can actually climb Everest. So that's what he ends up doing. That he ends up joining the expedition team led by Rob Hall. And when he joins, this is the year that had the deadliest accident on Everest. I think the final tally was 19 people died. So this was the deadliest season in Everest, and this is his story about it. This is him reflecting on sort of the conditions behind the climb, the overcrowding, did that lead to anything, the weather, the sort of relationship between the mountain guides and the Sherpas and the clients. It reflects on the experiences of technical levels of the clients, whether or not clients of certain levels should even be allowed to go on these kind of expeditions. Like, is Everest a rich man's sport, basically? And it goes through so many thoughts and ideas, and it's just, I mean, and then you read through this, and what's gonna happen, because at the very beginning he tells you, this was the deadliest accident on Everest, and as you're reading it, that makes you, every time there's a disagreement, every time there's a change in the plan, every time there's a call that's sort of coming out of the blue, it makes you think, okay, is this what contributes to that accident? And it's very, very high intensity of a read. And what was extra fun was that, I just read it this past August, and so the feeling of the Everest, I mean, it's so well written. I could feel the crisp air of Everest as I was reading, which was especially fun because I read this mostly at lunch during work. So I was outside, in the shade under a tree, and every time the wind kind of came by, I was feeling the heat of a Japanese August summer, but at the same time I was feeling the coldness of the Mount Everest air, and it was really, really fantastic. I mean, this book is, wow, it's just, it's just so intense and it's so fascinating. And I personally think that Krakauer did an amazing job of respecting everyone and respecting the profession and respecting Everest itself, but while rationally and critically denouncing the problems and discussing where maybe Everest is not something that should be a sport. Maybe it should just be a mountain that's respected, and maybe we should stop sending people up there. So it was an incredibly fascinating read. I loved it. And I think if you're, I'm not into nonfiction, it's an adventure story. It really is. So this would be a good way to get into nonfiction, I think. And on the other hand, if you're like, well, I'm not into sports and I'm not into climbing, it's like, well, it's not really about sports. It's about the human condition under very arduous circumstances, which is something to explore. I mean, you have these men who are so desperate to reach the summit because they've spent $60,000, $35,000 to do it, that they step over people who are dying because they're in the way to them going to the summit. They're like, well, here's this person who's dying. I could help him, but the summit's only 100 feet away. I paid a lot of money to get there. I'm going to get there. So there's a lot about the human condition and about how humanity kind of fails at these high altitudes. So, I mean, that's fascinating in itself. And then you're like, well, I know nothing about climbing. I know nothing about mountaineering. Am I going to understand everything? It's like, well, he's very, very good at describing the technical processes. So for me, I climb, amateur, obviously. I've never done more than a single pitch outdoor climb. I've never done a multi-pitch. But harnesses and rappelling and all of that, I'm familiar with that terminology. But even if I weren't, he explains it very, very well. And actually one thing that was really nice to do was every time he mentioned they were in a certain different segment of Everest, I would go to YouTube and watch. I would type in those the name of those areas into YouTube, and there were people who had filmed it and posted to YouTube, and that's just so beautiful to watch. I mean, it is all inspiring. Frightening frightening to see them like climb over ladders, over crevices, but super, super beautiful. So this, yes, there's a reason this is super famous, and it's fantastic. So good. So then I read my other favorite book of the month, and that was fascinating and gripping and thrilling, and oh gosh, it was so good. But I knew it was going to be good because I read the movie, and that's My Cousin Rachel. So the nonfiction was perfect. It was a good palate refresher. It made me excited again. I was like, okay, now I'm ready to read literary fiction, and then this became the first book, and oh yes, it was just perfect. So My Cousin Rachel is about this man named Ambrose, who was orphaned when he was young. So he was raised by, I had originally said uncle, but he was actually raised by an older cousin. But because of their age difference, it is very much more of a sort of like an uncle-nephew type relationship. And he was raised by this uncle cousin figure who led a very bachelor life his entire life, who never really interacted with women and never cared for the more feminine delights of life. And their home was very much a bachelor home, and their home was this very large estate. They're responsible for farmers and ranchers and things like that. And one Ambrose's uncle, as he gets older, his health starts to fail him, and he's been told that he needs to leave the English countryside during the winter and go to a more warmer climate. So he ends up in Italy, where he meets this woman, Rachel. And he writes letters back to his to Ambrose saying, I'm in Italy, my health is doing well, I met this woman, Rachel, we've been having very nice evenings together. It's been really nice to have someone I can talk to. And as the months go by, the letters become sort of strange. So like the next letter says, oh, Rachel and I have decided to get married. And it's only been a few months since they've left, but he had decided to get married. This longtime bachelor just all of a sudden gets married. But then after that, the letters are like, I made a mistake, something's wrong, I'm not well, I can't think straight, Rachel is intoxicating me, like I'm intoxicated by this woman and I don't know what's going on. And eventually he ends up dying, and Ambrose goes to Italy to find out, what happened, and he learns that his uncle has died and Rachel's not there. So he blames this woman. He's convinced that she's done something. And upon returning to England, he learns that Rachel has decided to come visit him. And the thing is that and I made this mistake when I did the book haul, was I said that Rachel was inherited everything of the estate, but actually it's the opposite. Ambrose's cousin never changed the will, so Ambrose kept the inheritance to the estate, and he's convinced that Rachel has come to sort of take the inheritance from him. And she comes, and he discovers that she's a very lovely person, it turns out, very, very lovely person. And he starts to fall for her. But throughout the whole book, there's still this question of, did she or did she not have any role in his uncle's death? And so it's this very thrilling, very gripping, very exciting story that's just so well written, and it's intense, and it's just it's fantastic. It's so amazing. And this is highly recommended. And I'm definitely gonna be reading Rebecca very soon. That's one of the next books I'm gonna be buying, because I mean, the writing was beautiful. It was fantastic. The way she describes just the environment, the setting, but really plunges into these characters and is able to manipulate you into thinking one way or another way, and then changing your mind as soon as she introduces a new detail. Because what's interesting is that Ambrose, while Rachel is at the estate with him and he's sort of falling in love with this woman, he keeps finding letters that he had never received from his uncle that had been tucked. So one was tucked in a book, one of them was tucked into a coat pocket, and those lead to him to sort of like question again what happened in Italy. So this is so fantastic. This is very, very good. And the movie's excellent too. The movie is so good. So like the movie is basically, I mean, they captured everything from the book. The only differences in the movie from the book are just cinematographic choices. So it might be the same event, but filmed in a slightly different location, just to add a visual appeal to the movie. But I mean, the movie is exactly the book, and so they're both very fantastic, very, very good. The next book is actually the book I tried reading after the Nigerian book, but then I had gotten, a little tired, and that's when I made the switch to nonfiction. But I came back to it, and that is George Orwell's Burmese Days. So I haven't read George Orwell since high school, when I read 1984, middle school read Animal Farm, and I really loved those books. And recently, before BookTube, before me starting a channel, I had been revisiting some of those authors that I really enjoyed a long time ago, but I had never read other books other than what was required for the high school curriculum. And so I picked up this one because it's very much a topic I like a lot, is these sort of, Burma, Cambodia, Thailand, all these countries that don't get as much press, but sort of the sort of interaction of, well, I do like, obviously I like the side from the actual people, but I also like the side of sort of white people in these countries. So I mean, if you read Marguerite Duras, The Lover, I mean, that kind of book is just, it's really interesting insight on sort of the interaction between white man and sort of the natives. And the natives is a questionable word, but the people of the actual country. So I picked up this book because I thought it'd be really fantastic, and it is very, very good. It's very different. So this was George Orwell's very first novel, so it's very different from 1984, very different from Animal Farm, but it does touch on these sort of similar, there are similar topics, not in sort of the government and things like that, but just about power dynamics. So basically what this is, it's about this, so there's this Burmese man who decides to sort of destroy the career of an Indian man. So back in this time, Burma was part of the Indian Empire that was owned by England. So there was a big mix of Englishmen, Burmese people, and then actual Indians from the area of India. But all of this was called India at the time. So it's this Burmese official who wants to ruin the career of this Indian man, because this Indian man is basically too good of a person. He doesn't take bribes. He's not corrupt, and that is really sort of like what's the word? Not atrocious, kind of like surprising. There's a word like that, but too surprising to this Burmese official, who's actually the very, very opposite. He loves bribes. He loves power. He does everything he wants to get more power, and so he's determined to ruin this man's career. However, this man is very much beloved by an Englishman, a white Englishman named Florey, and just by being friends with an Englishman, gives the doctor sort of a very high social power, a social status. And so the doctor comes to his friend Florey and tells him, beware of this Burmese official. He's trying to ruin my career, and by doing that, he's going to try and manipulate you. And so basically that's sort of like the background of the story, and then the story actually revolves around Florey, who is this very interesting Englishman in the sense that he very much loves Burma. Yes, it's a very hot country. Yes, it's very difficult to live in, but he loves it. He finds the flora very beautiful. He finds the settings very beautiful. He thinks the people are lovely. He thinks the traditional music is good, and he's very much in love with this country. But being a white man in this foreign country, he feels a certain amount of loneliness. And this woman named Elizabeth comes to Burma, and she is basically a social ladder climber. She came because she has failed in her own country. She's of low status, and she was told that if she goes to a country like Burma, she can get, especially with her looks, she can get top choice of the Englishmen who are there. And so it sort of revolves around this story where Florey absolutely falls in love with this woman who's not good for him. They have nothing in common. She is only impressed when he does sort of manly things, like when he's on a hunt, or when he helps her because she was attacked by a buffalo. She wasn't actually attacked, but she was kind of scared off by a buffalo, and he saved her. And she's very interested in these manly pursuits of his. But he's actually a very intellectual person, and when he talks about things in an intellectual way, she gets so bored. But he is falling in love with her because obviously she's this beautiful, English woman. She's the only one in the area, and he sort of just naturally falls in love with her. So it's an interesting book that really discusses the dynamics between man and woman, and intellectualism versus a sort of like social climbing, social status, whites versus the natives of the country, how the whites definitely feel like they're superior to them. And it's not that they think that the people are dumb. It's just like, no, we're just naturally superior. That's how it is. So it's very much a book about colonialism, and it's and like bigotry and corruption, and it's just very, very interesting. And there's some passages. It's like it's actually one of the most interesting sentences is on the back of this book, and it says, it's a society, after all, where natives were natives, interesting, no doubt, but finally an inferior people. So a very interesting book about colonialism at the time, and George Orwell really writes about it so well. You can tell, because this book is basically more or less based on his experiences when he was in Burma himself. And it was just this sort of the hypocrisy of everybody living in these countries, and their need to domineer over these people who were very, very good people, and just because their way of life is different doesn't make them inferior. But it's sort of this obsession with the white man, and how they're obsessed with thinking that they're superior just because they've done this or that, or you know, things like that. So my hair was doing something weird, but anyway, this was very, very good. Not a favorite read of mine, but in terms of how interesting it was, very, very good. The last book, unfortunately, I would not recommend to anyone. It's Petit eloge de l'errance by Akira Mizubayashi, which means like an ode. It's an ode to l'errance. So l'errance can kind of mean certain different things, and basically this book is describing what that means. So it's sort of like a wandering, or l'errance, keeping yourself away from things, or I don't know, there can be a lot of nuance to it, and this author describes what he means by that. So Akira Mizubayashi, basically I read this book because I really liked his other book called Une langue venue de l'ailleurs, which means Une langue venue de l'ailleurs, so a country from somewhere else, a language from somewhere else. So he's this Japanese man who fell in love with the French language, and in that book he discusses that love, and that book was spectacular. It was absolutely beautiful. But what I mean by book is that this is more like an essay almost. And so I absolutely loved that book, so I wanted to read this one because the sort of the blurb at the back I thought was very, very good. So if I'm going to read it, I can only read it for French people, I apologize, but c'est cet effort d'absence volontaire, de déracinement voulu, de distanciation active par rapport à son milieu qui paraît toujours naturel. C'est donc cette manière de s'éloigner de soi-même, ne serait-ce que momentanément et provisoirement, de se séparer du natal, du national et de ce qui, plus généralement, le fixe dans une étroitesse identitaire, c'est cela et surtout cela que j'appellerais errance. So apologies, I'm not used to reading French out loud, so it's really hard to get my mouth moving. So if you didn't understand that at all, it's not your fault. It's my fault. But it's just like, it was supposed to be about how sort of adopting this country, this new country sort of almost requires you to remove yourself from yourself, and requires you to remove yourself from your native country. And I ended up liking like the first 50 pages. He lost me for the following 50 pages, and then he got me back for like the last 5 pages. But I mean, there weren't really any new ideas in this. When he describes, like, yeah, he accurately describes how, you know, Japan is a very homogeneous society, and so it's very hard to step away from that and become an individual. And so, like, the book starts off with him gives little, like, anecdotes from his youth about ways how he first encountered this idea of l'errance. And the next one was his attempts to, now that he's discovered sort of the idea of l'errance, then it goes into his attempts to actually pursue l'errance himself. And I like those parts because those little anecdotes were very humorous and very charming. And yeah, they were very, you know, interesting insights on this idea of l'errance. But after that, he kind of lost me. I didn't really know where he wanted to go with this idea. And then at the very end, he talks about mon errance, my how errance sort of applies to me. And then he discusses a little bit about his Japan-France relationship. But at the end of the day, I mean, I read this in one sitting, which was how I was able to push through. But had this been any longer, I would have skimmed parts and I would have maybe even abandoned it. So not a big recommendation. But I do still recommend Une langue venue de l'ailleurs, because that was very, very good. That one I really enjoyed. So yeah, 6 books in August, a little bit here and there, nonfiction, fiction mix, some classics, some non-classics. It was fun. It was good. I still want my reading to get a little bit better because, yeah, on the literary side, it's been a lot of, like, just, yeah, this year, just, like, good to read. I'm glad to have read it, but not super, like, you know, yeah, my favorite book. I don't have any new favorites this year so far, so we'll see what happens. And yeah, thanks for watching. See you guys next time. Bye.